The Coalition Summit on Europa Station brought together representatives from 47 worlds, but none commanded more attention than Ambassador Talshira of the Valkyrie Empire. Her crystalline exoskeleton refracted the station's harsh lighting into cascading rainbows, and her three-fingered hands moved with practiced diplomacy as she negotiated treaties that would determine the fate of billions. Behind her, partially hidden in the shadows of the diplomatic suite, stood her daughter Emma. Emma was 15 in human years, though the Valkyrie measured time differently. Unlike her mother's brilliant, multifaceted exterior, Emma's crystalline surface was dull, almost opaque. And unlike every other Valkyrie in recorded history, Emma had never produced a single harmonic. She was mute. The Valkyrie communicated through complex resonant frequencies generated within their crystalline, bought as a language of music and mathematics combined. Emma could understand every word, every nuance, but when she tried to respond, nothing emerged. No sound, no vibration, just silence. James Corrigan was underneath Docking Bay 7's main atmospheric processor when the call came through. His hands were covered in synthetic lubricant, his jumpsuit was torn at the knee, and he'd been awake for 36 hours straight keeping Europa Station's aging infrastructure from catastrophic failure. Corrigan, we need you in the diplomatic wing. Level 9, Suite 42. James frowned, wiping his hands on an already filthy rag. I'm not cleared for the diplomatic wing. And I've got 17 more maintenance requests. Ambassador Talshira specifically requested a human mechanic. Something about unconventional thinking. You're it. 20 minutes later, James stood in the most luxurious suite he'd ever seen, feeling acutely aware of the grease stains on his clothes. Ambassador Talshira towered over him, nearly 7 feet tall, her presence simultaneously beautiful and intimidating. Mr. Corrigan, she said, her voice emerging from a translation device on her chest. Thank you for coming. This is my daughter, Emma. Emma stepped forward, and James's breath caught. Even with her dulled exterior, she was striking. Her large, multifaceted eyes, each containing hundreds of hexagonal lenses, fixed on him with an intensity that made him forget his nervousness. Emma cannot speak, the ambassador continued, her translated voice tight with controlled emotion. We have consulted with the finest Valkyrie physicians, human doctors, even the bioengineers of Kepler 442b, all have failed. I was told humans excel at ... improvisation, at seeing solutions others cannot. James looked at Emma, then back at the ambassador. Ma'am, I fix air recyclers and gravitational stabilizers. I'm not a doctor. Doctors think in terms of biology, Talshira said. You think in terms of systems. Perhaps that is what we need. Emma's eyes hadn't left James. She raised one hand and pointed to her chest, then made a gesture of frustration universal across species. Can I examine her? James asked hesitantly. Over the next 2 hours, James did something no specialist had thought to do. He didn't treat Emma as a patient. He treated her as a machine with a malfunction. He borrowed a handheld spectrometer from the station's geological survey team. He requisitioned a sonic frequency analyzer from the communications bay. He even convinced a skeptical Valkyrie physician to provide detailed scans of Emma's internal crystalline structure. Emma cooperated with every test, her large eyes following James's movements with something that looked like hope. As the station's artificial night cycle began, James sat cross-legged on the suite's floor, surrounded by holographic projections of data. Emma sat across from him, perfectly still. It's not biological, James muttered, more to himself than anyone else. The structures are perfect. The resonance chambers are intact. There's no physical damage. He pulled up a comparison scan of Ambassador Talshira's internal structure. The patterns were nearly identical, except there, James whispered, zooming in on a cluster of microscopic fractures in Emma's central crystalline column. They were so small that medical scanners had registered them as normal variations. But James recognized the pattern. Harmonic fatigue, he said, looking up at Emma. You're not broken. You're dampened. He turned to Ambassador Talshira. Has Emma been exposed to high-intensity electromagnetic fields? Specifically during her development years? Talshira's entire body seemed to still. We lived near the Imperial Communications Array on Velkar Prime for 8 years. Emma was 5 when we moved there. That's it, James said, excitement building in his voice. The M interference caused microfractures in her resonance structure. Not enough to show up on biological scans, but enough to dampen any sound she tries to produce. It's like, he searched for an analogy, like trying to ring a bell that's been packed in foam. Can it be repaired? The ambassador's translated voice cracked slightly. James looked at Emma, seeing the desperate hope in her multifaceted eyes. Maybe, but not with surgery. We need to retune her entire crystalline matrix from the inside out. What followed was 48 hours of intense, delicate work. James converted a maintenance bay into a makeshift laboratory, surrounding Emma with a carefully calibrated array of harmonic generators. The theory was simple: use external frequencies to slowly stimulate and repair the microfractures, allowing Emma's natural resonance to gradually strengthen. The execution was anything but simple. James worked with barely any sleep, constantly adjusting frequencies, monitoring Emma's responses, making minute corrections. Emma endured it all with patience and trust that humbled him. On the 3rd day, as James was making what he hoped would be the final adjustment, Emma suddenly went rigid. Her entire body began to vibrate. "Stop!" Ambassador Talshira commanded, but James shook his head. "Wait," he said quietly. "Listen." A sound emerged from Emma, faint at first, barely audible, then stronger. A pure, clear note that resonated through the maintenance bay, building in complexity and beauty. It was tentative, like a voice used for the first time. But it was unmistakably there. Emma's eyes found James's, and the harmonic she produced shifted a simple phrase in the Velkari language that the translation device rendered as, "Thank you." Ambassador Talshira stood frozen, her own harmonics creating a cascade of emotion that needed no translation. James Corrigan, the poor human mechanic with grease under his fingernails and patches on his jumpsuit, smiled wearily. "You're welcome, Emma. Now let's teach you how to really use that voice." In the months that followed, Emma's voice grew stronger, more confident. She would eventually become a renowned composer, creating harmonics that bridged human music and Velkari communication. But she never forgot the mechanic who saw what no one else could see, who looked at her not as broken, but as a system waiting for the right repair. And sometimes, the impossible just needs someone willing to try. End.